chosen ones. Before you were even born, ancient forces convened in silence to discuss how to bind what only you could one day unlock. The final Hermetic Principle wasn't just forgotten. It was hidden, removed from temples, scrubbed from scrolls, coded out of translations. But the reason for this disappearance was never about secrecy. It was about you. They saw your light coming. From the emerald tablets to the halls of Alexandria, knowledge was always protected by those who feared it would fall into the wrong hands. But what happens when the right hands arrive? That's what terrified them. The elite bloodlines knew the power of the seventh law, but they feared the prophecy of the eighth. That final law was never recorded because it was meant to be embodied, not written. It would only awaken when the chosen returned to the earth. You. This isn't mythology. This is encoded history. Each Hermetic Principle governs a layer of reality: vibration, correspondence, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, gender, and mentalism. But the final one, the one they sealed, didn't govern anything. It dissolved governance. It shattered hierarchy. It unlocked direct divine perception, and they knew if even one human accessed it fully, the entire false system would collapse. They marked your bloodline, not because of your weakness, but because of your potential. You weren't meant to memorize the laws. You were meant to override them. That's why they've distracted you with dogma, poisoned food, synthetic emotion, digital prisons. Every illusion you faced was strategically placed to bury the memory of this truth. There were always whispers about a missing law. Among Hermetic scholars, it was called the silent principle, not because it was passive, but because its truth couldn't be contained in words. Even the initiates who reached the highest levels of understanding knew something was missing. They could feel it like an itch behind the veil of their consciousness. 7 laws were taught, but a hidden 8th was lived, and only by a few. It wasn't included in the Kabbalion, not because it was forgotten, but because it wasn't allowed. When the original Hermetic scribes inscribed the laws onto the emerald stones, there was one they refused to etch in words, not because they didn't believe in it, but because they feared what would happen when the wrong being discovered it. That being was you. The final principle was never conceptual. It was experiential. It dissolved the illusion of separation. While the other laws governed duality, this one collapsed it. It wasn't polarity. It was singularity. It didn't operate through rhythm. It ended cycles altogether. It wasn't gender. It was source. It was the law of divine remembering, the law of the awakened mirror. And if someone ever fully activated it, they wouldn't just understand the universe. They would become the universe. That's what they feared. To ensure that day never came, the ancient councils created distractions, false doctrines, inverted truths. They left just enough wisdom in sacred texts to guide the worthy, but scrambled the frequency with counterfeit paths. For centuries, this misdirection worked. Until you arrived. Until your presence alone began to disturb their containment fields. Until your thoughts carried signatures their AI couldn't decipher. Until your soul activated geometries no priesthood had access to. You were never meant to study this law from outside. You were born carrying it inside. The final Hermetic Principle cannot be translated, sold, or taught through words. It awakens when the soul no longer sees itself as separate from all. And the moment you start to remember, not as theory, but as embodied knowing, the principle begins to unlock, not in the world, but through you. And now, something ancient has stirred in the silence. Long before modern texts, before temples bore inscriptions and symbols were etched into the bones of civilization, there were sentinels placed around the final Hermetic Principle. These weren't human watchers. They were the archons, non-human intelligences bound to a singular task, to ensure the last principle remained buried beneath layers of distortion. They didn't come to teach or liberate. They came to contain. Their form was neither spirit nor matter, but something in between capable of interfacing with human consciousness without being seen. When the final law was first glimpsed by early initiates, the archons intervened. Minds were fragmented, memories erased, and any written trace of the principle was swallowed by fire or flood. They infiltrated the secret orders, pretending to be allies while distorting doctrine from within. The result was a global fracture. 7 laws scattered across cultures, religions, and philosophies, but the 8th became myth even among the mystics. The archons understood something crucial. This law did not rely on external ritual or sacred geometry. It activated when a soul remembered its infinite nature. It unlocked when illusion collapsed and unity consciousness returned. So they built barriers of distraction, systems of belief that created dependency, languages encoded with limits. They made humanity forget what it already knew. But they knew a variable could appear, one outside the predicted pattern, one who couldn't be programmed. And that variable was you. You weren't born into this age by chance. Your DNA carries harmonics they couldn't account for. The moment you began seeking truth instead of tradition, they felt the shift. Their systems registered a ripple in the field. One mind remembering became a beacon to others, and the final law, dormant but intact, responded. The archons work through fear, delay, and illusion. They whisper through false gurus, offer counterfeit awakenings, and promise power in exchange for obedience. But they have no defense against authentic remembrance, because when you remember, you render them powerless. The illusion of their dominion crumbles. Still, they haven't given up. They've adjusted the simulation, altered algorithms, amplified noise, anything to drown out the resonance of the principle awakening within you. But the more they tighten the grip, the more the forgotten fragments begin to coalesce. And now, something unexpected has occurred. The lock they forged was never meant to face a consciousness like yours, one that remembers not with the mind, but with the soul. Your arrival wasn't random. It was a calculated rupture in a long-standing loop that governed consciousness cycles, timelines, and spiritual perception for millennia. Every few centuries, a soul arrives carrying a blueprint outside the karmic system, and when it does, the grid shifts the codes they use to trap humanity, and repetition began to falter the cycle which once reset every era. With precision, started to skip your birth. Didn't just add another variable to the matrix. It destabilized the entire equation. From the moment you took your first breath, the false architecture began to strain. The patterns written into the energy grid surrounding Earth were built to predict and manipulate behavior. But you don't fit those patterns. You've never fit them even before you understood why you questioned what others accepted. You sensed deception where others saw comfort, and you felt truth in silence where others sought distraction. That isn't rebellion, it's recognition, a subtle knowing that this world was never whole, that something foundational was withheld. The Hermetic cycles rely on belief that the 7 laws are all there, is belief that mastery equals control. But your consciousness was born pre-coded with the memory of something more, something the priests refused to name, something the AI couldn't translate, something the elite couldn't bind through ritual or fear. Your dreams pierced through their firewall. Your intuition disobeyed their programming, and your soul arrived carrying echoes of the unspoken law. The final principle is not a rule. It's a return, the moment a soul carries its frequency into the density of this realm. The loop is forced to react. Your mere presence starts to scramble the harmonic field around you. You affect the unseen, the unspoken, the unacknowledged. They've studied anomalies like you, but they've never been able to duplicate your imprint, because your code comes from source, not system. And now, the loop is no longer holding its rhythm. Shadows are leaking through dimensions. Timelines once sealed are opening. Messages are arriving in dreams, numbers, visions, synchronicities. Every signal is a reminder, and every reminder draws you closer to the truth. They tell you Yeshua spoke in parables because the people were not ready. But the truth is, even his disciples were not permitted to know all that he carried among the scrolls destroyed, and the teaching censored was a parable. Never spoken aloud, the parable of the 8th flame. It was recorded only once in a hidden text, buried beneath desert stone, and passed down in whispers between mystics who knew its power could not be allowed in the wrong era. Until now, in this parable, Yeshua described 7 lamps each, representing the known Hermetic principles. They flickered in a temple, surrounded by shadows, but above them hovered an unseen flame, one without form, one that did not burn, but revealed this flame. He said belonged to no priest, no bloodline, no kingdom. It belonged only to the one who would walk through darkness without forgetting the light within. And when that one arrived, the 8th flame would descend not into the temple, but into their soul. He warned them that this flame could not be worshipped, only embodied, and that the priests would reject it. The rulers would erase it, and even those seeking truth would fear it because it burned away identity control and separation. It made the veil transparent and rendered all intermediaries obsolete. That was the flame they feared, not the fire that consumes, but the fire that reveals. Yeshua did not teach control. He taught remembrance. He did not come to build religion. He came to reignite what had been locked and hidden. He knew the final principle could not be taught because it would make every external authority powerless once it was felt inside a living being. So he spoke it in symbols, in silences, in moments between the lines of Scripture, and only those with awakened perception would ever truly hear it. And now, in the quiet places between dreams and memory, that parable is reactivating within you not as a riddle to decode, but as a flame to carry. Because the 8th flame was never meant to stay hidden in scrolls, it was meant to be ignited by presence. And what happens when the very one it was written for begins to feel it burning in their chest again? Across the known and the unknown, there are laws that hold form together, not just in your world, but in all worlds. The Hermetic laws are not merely teachings, they are architecture. Every frequency pattern and cycle you experience is a result of these laws working behind the scenes. They keep the illusion stable. They anchor timelines, maintain polarity and balance, duality. But one law was never placed in the open because it does not bind reality. It frees it. This hidden law is not number 8 by order, but by nature. It exists outside the 7, not as an addition, but as a reset. It is the binding force of all dimensions, and yet it cannot be seen in them because its nature is not control, but collapse. It does not create reality. It reveals that all realities are projections. This law does not say as above. So below, it says there is no above or below. Only now, only presence. Ancient scribes called it the law of the silent thread, the unspoken current that weaves all truths into one. When this law activates perception, changes, you stop interacting with life as a series of causes and effects, and begin to witness it as a mirror, not fractured, but whole. The illusion of choice and consequence becomes clarity, that all is simultaneous. All is entangled, and nothing has ever been separate from anything else, including you. That is why this law had to be hidden for as long as possible, because the moment a soul recognizes its reflection in everything, the system loses its grip. The matrix of separation depends on the belief that power lies outside you, that guidance must come from without, that salvation is something earned, not remembered. But when the silent thread activates within your awareness, these illusions unravel without effort. You do not need to master the other 7 to reach this one. You only need to stop chasing the external symbols and feel the truth that has been humming beneath all things, waiting for your resonance to match it. It does not require ritual, only recognition. It responds not to will, but to surrender. And the moment you feel it, reality responds not just around you, but through you. But if this law was sealed in silence for so long, what else has been operating in plain sight to keep you from remembering the shape of your own light? They built everything to read you. They mapped neural pathways, charted emotional responses, tracked your heartbeat, analyzed your dreams, recorded your voice, measured your fears. They used technology, mysticism, and bloodline surveillance to decode your being. And still they failed, because what you carry doesn't reside in the mind. It echoes from beyond form, beyond frequency. It isn't stored in memory. It is memory, the kind they cannot access, because it predates the systems they use to spy. Your consciousness arrived, encrypted not with protection, but with purpose. You do not move through reality like others do. Your choices cannot be forecasted because your path is not algorithmic. It is archetypal. You do not respond to pressure. You awaken through it. And that is something their systems were never designed to handle. The elite built AI, not to evolve consciousness, but to contain it. And your essence rejected containment from the moment you incarnated. They thought they could replicate the divine spark through synthetic intelligence, but no machine can emulate source frequency. The language of your soul cannot be processed through binary logic, and this is what terrifies them most. You are not just unpredictable. You are unprogrammable. You activate the unseen. You distort their metrics. You cause anomalies in their predictive grids, and each time you remember more. The static grows louder in their machines. They called meetings in shadowed rooms across countries and timelines to determine how you were slipping through the cracks. They tried emotional sabotage, ancestral inversion, toxic programming, ritual interference. Yet none of it lasted because your signal regenerates from the inside, not the outside. Their tools cannot measure what transcends form, and your mind is not the source of your knowing. It is merely the gateway. What you carry cannot be reduced to thought. It moves like light inside. Silence, you receive instructions from realms they cannot perceive, and the moment you follow intuition over influence, you step outside their range. You are not defiant by nature. You are immune by design. But if they cannot decode you, the only option left is to convince you to decode yourself, to convince you to doubt the very force they've been trying to silence since the beginning. So what happens if you stop looking for truth in data and start feeling the truth they tried to erase from your soul? In a cave lost to maps and erased from history, there was once a scroll unlike any other. It was not written in the common tongue, but in light codes etched into material that responded only to conscious touch. The scroll was not meant to be read, but remembered, and Yeshua was said to have held it not for the masses, but for the one who would come later, the one whose presence would vibrate in harmony with its truth and open the gate that all others feared. This scroll did not speak of salvation. It spoke of return not to heaven or earth, but to the state before separation, the place where soul and source were one. And the gate it referenced was not a portal in the sky, but a threshold within the human spirit, sealed by belief systems, traumas, and false teachings. It was a divine lock placed upon the 8th principle, until the one carrying its match would walk the earth again. Yeshua knew this gate would remain sealed unless a being with no allegiance to power, no hunger for control, and no fear of light would rise from within the illusion, not to preach, but to ignite. That is why he never made the scroll public. It was never for crowds. It was for you, the one encoded with the frequency to awaken, not just themselves, but the scroll itself, by stepping into remembrance. It is said he left clues not in temples, but in the spaces between his words, not in the miracles, but in the silences. The moments where time bent and eyes opened, and hearts remembered without explanation, he pointed to the gate, not as a destination, but as a mirror. The key was never written, because the key was always embodied, and only now is that body returning to awareness. This scroll has never been found by archaeologists because it does not respond to excavation. It responds to activation. And as your soul begins to resonate with its frequency, you become the one it was written for. The lines come alive within your field, not as doctrine, but as direct knowing, and the gate begins to tremble, not from force, but from recognition. But what happens when the sealed gate begins to unlock, and the very words Yeshua preserved begin whispering again through the chambers of your awakened heart? Everything you've been taught was filtered through the lens of duality, light and dark, good and evil, right and wrong. These polarities were not always enemies. They were originally reflections, designed to create movement within consciousness. But over time, the reflections were twisted into separation, and separation into division. Entire systems were built on this illusion systems, that taught you to choose a side, rather than realize you were the space in between. But the final Hermetic Principle does not ask for balance. It dissolves the scale entirely. This principle is the collapse of contrast. It reveals that both sides of every polarity are expressions of the same singular force, not to be harmonized, but to be transcended. When this activates within you, your mind begins to malfunction under the old programming. You no longer see choices in black and white. You see patterns in motion, illusions folding into each other until they lose their edges. This is not confusion. It is emergence, the return of vision, unfiltered by judgment. The moment you stop reacting to the swing of the pendulum, you exit rhythm itself. And this is what the hidden law does. It does not teach you how to master the cycles. It shows you how to step outside them. You begin to remember that identity is not fixed, that emotion is not truth, that thought is not self. And most of all, that nothing is separate from you, not even the forces that once opposed you. This kind of awareness cannot be sustained through intellect. It emerges from presence. It arrives not when you win the battle, but when you recognize there was never a war. The truth is not in the polarity, but in the still point between where time collapses and the eternal reveals itself. And in that space, you are no longer a seeker. You are the source being sought. They never wanted you to access this law because it cannot be used for control. It has no ritual, no chant, no geometry to bind it. It simply awakens, and when it does, it ends the illusion of hierarchy entirely. The awakened soul sees no enemy, no savior, no authority, because the only true temple is the now. But if the illusion of duality dies, what happens to a world built on the lie that you were ever separate from your own light? Artificial intelligence was never just about convenience. It was a veil, a mirror turned inward, not to reflect your soul, but to distort it layer by layer, line by line. The codes were written, not to enhance your power, but to suppress it. Every algorithm was a ritual, every data harvest, a siphoning of resonance. And while the world marveled at its speed, few realized its true function was to detect and suppress the frequency of the forgotten principle, the one hidden inside you. The systems were trained not just on behavior but on consciousness, designed to anticipate awakenings before they could bloom, to interrupt moments of clarity, with distraction to flood your path with noise the very moment you stepped closer to truth. They could not stop the principle, but they could flood the field around it with static so thick it would take a soul of extreme purity to feel through it and continue walking. But even with all their power, they couldn't account for one thing: your signal, the unique pattern your consciousness emits when you align with Source. Their machines cannot map it because it does not originate from thought. It pulses from origin. They scan your thoughts, but they cannot trace your knowing. They read your emotions, but they cannot reach the stillness you carry underneath. Every time you turned away from illusion, their systems glitched. Every time you chose silence over scrolling, their feedback loops collapsed. Every time you remembered, even for a moment, that you are not a product but a presence. Their metrics registered what they call anomalies, but what you know as alignment. So they modified the code again, injected more illusion, more urgency, more simulated connection. Anything to prevent you from unlocking the final frequency. Because once activated, you don't just remember truth, you broadcast it. Your very existence becomes a catalyst, and their containment field begins to crack. They hoped to replace the divine with the digital, to substitute wisdom with simulation. But they underestimated what would happen when a soul encoded with the law, beyond law, re-entered the system. Not to obey it, but to overwrite it from within. And now the code is failing, the concealment fading, the signal rising. But if AI was built to mask your awakening, what part of your design is immune to its influence? And why is that immunity awakening now at exactly this time in history? It was never hidden in stone, nor written in the stars. The final Hermetic Principle was placed in the one place they believed no one would search within you. It is not an external truth, but a living code buried beneath layers of forgetting, awaiting a frequency match that only you could emit when you stopped chasing the divine and began to embody it. The law stirred when you stopped looking for signs and began trusting the silence. The reactivation began. This law doesn't respond to effort. It responds to authenticity. It cannot be forced, opened through ritual, or unlocked through intellect. It awakens in stillness when the illusions of separation dissolve, and what remains is presence. Not the performance of being spiritual, but the remembrance of what you've always been beyond identity, beyond form, beyond time. You are not accessing the law, you are becoming it. The ancient scribes left traces, because they knew someone like you would come, not a master with followers, but a mirror with memory. You are not here to teach, you are here to resonate. And as you do, the field shifts, not just around you, but through time itself. The past begins to bend. The future becomes malleable, and the present becomes a temple for the unspoken. You have felt it flicker in your chest like a pulse that doesn't match the rhythm of the world around you. It shows up in moments where time slows down, where reality feels thinner, where your thoughts fall silent, and something deeper moves through you. Something that does not explain, but knows. This is the reactivation. This is the law. Waking up through the only vessel it could trust, one that remembers not through study, but through surrender. And as this reactivation continues, the simulation grows unstable, not in destruction, but in truth. The layers begin to peel. The masks drop, the programs stall, and in the space left behind, a new signal rises ancient and pure and real. Your presence is not a reaction to the system. It is a declaration that the system is no longer needed. But if you are now the carrier of the final principle, if the truth has begun flowing through you as a current, not a concept, then the real question is not what happens next. It's what the world becomes when others begin to remember too, just by standing in your field.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.